Emily Ehman here for the Big Ten Network alongside Daniel Gillman, the host of Six Rotations, the NCAA volleyball web show where they break down and recap all the action each week in NCAA volleyball. So what we're going to do today is break down a little things of our own. So first up, we're going to talk about the big matchup of the week, number 1 Nebraska versus number 5 Wisconsin, the rematch of the 2021 National Championship game. Daniel, what is the biggest thing that you're watching for in this game?
Well, Emily, what's interesting here is the 8 straight wins for Wisconsin, because they dissuaded the cliche, hard to beat a team 3 times in one season. They beat them in the championship. We all remember that. What I'm looking at is how much soft serve in the front row there's going to be.
Okay.
Because Julia Orgel feels like an X factor. We know how often Nebraska out-of-system has success, but if Orgel tips too much, that out-of-system success could turn to a tie, and Wisconsin would then be in the back seat there. So I'm keeping an eye on Orgel there in the front row. If she has success, then Nebraska will start struggling and maybe make a change in the back.
I think part of it too is just the setter-hitter connections for Wisconsin. We've seen it at times. It's been better, but throughout the season we've seen it so up and down that when those connections are there, that's when you see the tips more, and especially for a player like Julia Orgel who likes a faster set. I mean, you have setters coming in all the time on their team running that 6-2 offense. You're gonna have those connection issues, which is when you're seeing those tips, which is gonna put Nebraska in a position that they want to be in.
Well, how weird is it that we're not gonna have Hilly and Haynes dumping from the front row? You mentioned the 6-2, Emily. There's not a time, at least that we can remember, that these two teams have battled both running 6-2 offenses. So in your mind, what does that throw in as a wrench to not have the attacking setter?
So I think when you don't have that front row attack as a setter, to me the matchup that I'm watching is the middles. You need to have something up the gut that's doing a really good job efficiency-wise. These middles, so for Nebraska, you have Becca Alec and Caitlin Horde, 2 players that as the season has gone on, have done exceptionally well, especially Becca Alec. She's now on her 6th straight game, hitting over 680 or 385. It's ridiculous the things that she's doing, but I think on the other side, Wisconsin's middles, Danielle Hart and Caroline Crawford, have to do a great job of just touching them up, and as well as Nebraska's middles. But whoever's going to win that matchup in the middle, whether it's getting more block touches, whether it's getting more stuffs, hitting at a higher efficiency, if both teams can get their middles involved in this game, I think that will end up the winner on the other side.
So from CC to GG, where do you think the edge is between Rodriguez and GG in terms of the libero? It feels pretty even for me, at least.
I personally think Rodriguez has the upper hand, just being in the Big Ten a little bit longer. Okay, yes, 1 year, but I think it really does give her the upper edge of being in these really big games. Like, Roddy just played in a national championship. You know, Gigi is still kind of coming into her own. She's done better as the season has gone on. But, you know, I think with the liberos for this game specifically, whoever sets better out of system could also be the winner. Because when you're running a 6-2, the ball is going to be on the setter a lot, in which case the libero is going to be taking it. And if you can be efficient out of system, then you're probably going to have the upper hand.
Well, here's one thing that I have a little bit of an eye on, because for Nebraska, not one player on their team has beaten Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And that's one of those rivalry things when everything comes to a head. Obviously, they're going to play at the end of the season. But when you were at Northwestern and you had one, maybe like a big sister kind of opponent that you had to every single week be like, oh, that's the team we need to get to. It feels like Nebraska has a little bit more to play for, especially on the road.
And we've seen it from Wisconsin this year, too. I mean, in the Minnesota game, Minnesota hadn't beaten them. Not one person on that team had. And I think Wisconsin, you know, they're coming off of 3 Big Ten titles. They're coming off a national championship, 3 straight Final Fours. This is a team that has had so much success. Yes, they're still pretty young, and there's a lot of pieces that haven't had it, but these other teams are gunning for them. There's a target on Wisconsin's back, and in this matchup, I think Nebraska, I'm not going to say they want it more because, you know, both teams, I'm sure, really want it, but Nebraska has had this game circled for so long, which brings us to the point of, in the Big Ten title race, right now, Nebraska is the one to chase. You know, they have had 6 straight sweeps. They're leading Wisconsin by just 1 game. But once Thanksgiving weekend comes, who do you think will end up on top? Will it be Nebraska?
It's hard to pick against them, to be honest. I mean, they have won every single set that we've seen in the last few weeks. Yeah. They're now the #1 team in the nation. We're going to see that RPI start to move up, especially after this Wisconsin game. They do have some maybe challenges for them to wake up for in the next few weeks. Maryland's a very tough team, though. They're blocking really well, and we'll see them this week as well put on a challenge.
I think it's tough to say, especially right now where Nebraska hasn't played, you know, Wisconsin. Yes, they played Ohio State, but the game went 5 and it was crazy. And that's a matchup again for that November 13th game. The Buckeyes could easily come out and potentially, you know, push Nebraska to the edge. But where I think Nebraska has an edge right now is their defense, like, truly looks unstoppable. You know, they've only lost 8 sets this entire year, 6 straight Big Ten sweeps. 3 of those against ranked opponents. Those are numbers that don't just happen. And when you're the best in the country, limiting your opponent to 119 hitting percentage, the next best defense isn't even close to that. Like, this team just doesn't have a lot of holes. So I agree, November 13th in Columbus is going to be the biggest test. But then we get into Thanksgiving weekend where we have Wisconsin playing Nebraska and then Wisconsin playing Ohio State. I think the chips are going to fall differently than we might expect in that last weekend, which of course makes it even more exciting for Selection Sunday.
It does, and it's fun that we're able to talk here this week because it feels like the next 4 days are the second most important stretch of the Big Ten season, second to just Thanksgiving, because obviously you've got the match Wednesday night, and then this upcoming weekend with Ohio State, Penn State, and then Wisconsin, Minnesota, and that's going to be a bit of a loser leaves town weekend, right? Because if Penn State takes down Ohio State, if Minnesota beats Wisconsin, then we have to reevaluate. But if the better teams continue on, then we can kind of set our sights to the end of November.
And it's one of those things where, say Wisconsin loses to Nebraska on Wednesday, and then say they lose again to Minnesota on Saturday. For me, I'm probably taking them out of contention regardless of what happens the rest of the season, because I don't see Nebraska losing potentially more than 1 game for the rest of the year. And for Ohio State, I also kind of don't see the same thing, maybe with that weekend where they're home and facing Nebraska, but we'll see how that falls. But another big topic this year with all the players that graduated is we've had some breakout stars. So I want to know, who is your most surprising player or players this season?
And this is going to be contentious, of course, right? Because we're going to leave some names out there. I'm going to get some texts. I'm going to keep it upperclassmen heavy because when you talk about surprising players, for me, to have a senior and a junior, and that's the duo that I've got here, Anastasia Russ, making the move over from Pittsburgh to Maryland, may not be a name that you all thought I would say first, but she didn't play much at Pittsburgh, did experience winning ways with Dan Fisher and crew. Then last year only played a handful of matches. Now, Anastasia Russ out here, 1.6 blocks per set in conference play to lead all of the Big Ten, and she's hitting .388, which is 4th in all of conference play.
Crazy numbers.
It's a name that Nebraska fans need to get used to, because this weekend you could hear the announcer say Russ with the block a few times. That's going to be my first. And then another one is a Big West transfer from Leysa Elisaya, CSU Bakersfield, a team that I guarantee that none of you guys have been watching the last few years. I had a couple of her matches on ESPN3 last season. She is dominating for Penn State, and now she'll have to play without Taylor Trammell, which adds a little bit of difficulty, but 5th in the conference in assists per set. Just named Setter of the Week for the 2nd time. She's 5'10" and competing in 6 rotations. I really like Elisaya. I know you've got younger names though, so you'll make the fans a little bit happier. Who are you liking in terms of surprising players?
So my number one this season, and she's been a surprise since I think the beginning of the season when she started putting up crazy numbers, but Michigan middle blocker Jess Robinson. I mean, the 180 that we've seen from last season to this year. Last season she hit 285. This year leading the NCAA 480, and that's against Big Ten opponents too. I mean, she is putting up crazy numbers. She worked so hard in the offseason to try to really get those numbers up. She came in with her setters all the time, and now I think Michigan having setter Maddie Dowd come in, and who has played with her for so many years before she even came to Michigan, has been really big for her. But she put in the work in the offseason, and she's been doing some crazy things.
Big chance on Wednesday night. If she steps up and they win the game in the volleyball sense and beat Ohio State, that's nationally televised. That's a true chance for Michigan to really solidify themselves, because they've been ranked but not necessarily respected by the nation.
I think, too, for Michigan, this will be a really good test because you're coming off a loss to Indiana, who, to be fair, Indiana, I think, is a very good team. When they're healthy, I believe they can hang with the best of them. Michigan, in a way, had a slip up, but I agree. If Jess Robinson can really show up, especially blocking-wise, we know she's going to show up hitting-wise. 1 out of every 2 balls she's going to get is going to hit the floor. But blocking-wise, if she can come up big against a really tough Ohio State team, this could be big. But the next best, most surprising player I have, Becca Alec. And that may not be that surprising considering she was the number 6 recruit coming in. But to me, where she's been the most impressive is as a middle in the Big Ten, and as a middle really in any NCAA team coming in as a freshman, it is so hard to do your job well. The speed of the game is so completely different than it is from high school or even from club. Like, the speed of the pins is so fast that most middles take a few years to really get used to it, but the numbers that she's putting up have gotten progressively better, and her competition has gotten progressively better. I mentioned 6 straight games hitting over 385 as well. I mean, offensively, she has just been unstoppable.
Well, blocking's one thing, right? You mentioned the speed of the game, but I think Callie Schwarzenbach showed us with Nebraska that hitting is not that easy when you get to that next level, and she was averaging 5-6 kills per match, it feels like. what Becca Alec's been able to do, hitting up over 410 in conference play. And then obviously the fun little jape that John Cook threw out there after the Purdue match, quote, Becca Alec might have something to say about Ava Hudson being the unanimous pick for Big Ten Freshman of the Year. It's just fun to see John Cook getting involved, and I'm excited to see Alec's success move on as well, and Cook to kind of prompt it up.
And talking to Cook this week about this game, he was saying Alec is playing at an All-American level, and he said that this Wednesday is going to be the biggest test for her to see how she does against a really, really good opponent, and especially a good opponent where they're really driven through their middles. So how many block touches is she going to get? It doesn't all have to be just big stuff blocks. He wants her touch percentage to be really high. He wants her to do the same things offensively that she's doing in these other matches against some of the best blockers in the country. So I think this Wednesday will be a very big test for Alec. Very big test for Nebraska and Wisconsin, and we will see who ends up with the title.